Julie gives a sign. And hello, everybody. I'm Kim, and this is a session. This is Jessica Graham about mindfulness for mind-blowing sex. And a few words about Jessica beforehand. Jessica Graham is a meditation teacher, sex, relationship, and spiritual guide for couples and individuals, speaker, and author of Good Sex, Getting Off Without Checking Out. She is a contributing editor of the meditation blog, Deconstructing Yourself. Jessica's work is featured on many apps, and she is also certified in grief recovery coaching. In addition to this, Jessica is also an award-winning actor and filmmaker. So, and here it goes to you, Jessica.
Oh, thank you, Kim. So, hello, everyone. So good to be with you. I'd like to take a few minutes to settle in together. So, you can go ahead and, if you like, close your eyes. And we'll just begin by taking a few nice, slow, deep breaths, breathing deep into the belly. And a nice, slow exhale. Allowing the exhale to be slightly longer than the inhale, breathing deep into the belly. And a slow, long exhale. A few more just like that, breathing in. And breathing out. I'd like you to start to notice any pleasure associated with breathing. So obviously our bodies need the breath to live. And so each time we take an inhale, there is pleasure available in the body. It's just a matter of tuning into it. So even if you have a cold or allergies, or for whatever reason breathing doesn't feel good, you still may be able to find some drops of pleasure through the body that light up with the inhale. So just starting to notice, is there anything pleasurable about the inhale? Can you feel how the body is grateful for the breath? Maybe noticing how the breath caresses the inside of the body as it moves through. Almost as if the breath is a lover's caress, but inside the body, through the throat and the lungs, the expansion and contraction of the diaphragm, all the flow and the movement in the body with the breath. And then also noticing how with the exhale, there's this beautiful release, this surrender, this letting go that happens through the body. And there can be something really pleasurable about that as well. So as you continue to breathe in and breathe out, noticing what feels good here. Where's the pleasure here? Where's even the sensuality in this next breath? Flow of sensation. Caress of the breath through the body. And then go ahead and start to explore with your physical awareness through the body, noticing, are there any other sensations of pleasure? Maybe some relaxation, some warmth. Kim was describing some really pleasurable sounding sensations just before we started. A soft, warm feeling. And as you encounter sensations of pleasure, I want you to really, really feel them. So letting go of any thought or any uncomfortable sensation when it arises, and just coming back to what feels good. So this doesn't mean that we have to quiet the mind. It doesn't mean we have to get rid of our thoughts. Just noticing, oh, there's some thinking there, and we come back to pleasure in the body. Same thing if you're experiencing pain. So I have chronic pain, and one of my practices is to return to pleasure, even when there's a lot of pain. And over time, we can train ourselves to be able to orient towards pleasure, even when there's discomfort. And so if you are experiencing some kind of discomfort in the body, just practice moving attention from that into a place of pleasure. And it's okay if you need to do that over and over again. It is a practice. We're practicing. We don't need to get rid of the uncomfortable. Right now, we're just practicing orienting towards the pleasurable. Now, pleasure in the body could be something really obvious, big waves of pleasure, but it could also be a very small sensation, somewhere unexpected. So if you're thinking, I don't have any pleasure in my body, get curious. What about the toes? What about your chin? Check out some spots that maybe you wouldn't assume pleasure would be present. And look for the more subtle layers of pleasure. Tuning into these subtle layers of pleasure awakens us to all of pleasure, deepens our capacity to be with pleasure. So taking just another moment here to focus on whatever aspect of pleasure is available in your body. And as you're ready, go ahead and start to blink your eyes open if they're closed. Okay. So before we move forward, just taking a moment to notice how it feels to have your eyes open, how it feels. Some of you have your cameras on and you're being seen. Some of you don't. And either one is okay. But just noticing how it feels, whatever you've chosen. And I want you now, with the eyes open, whether your camera's on or not, to tune into pleasure in your body with the eyes open. And so you can all see me. I can see some of you. So seeing me or any of the other faces that are on camera while experiencing pleasure. So tuning into something that feels good while seeing other people or another person. I don't know if you can only see me or if you can see the whole group, but if you can see me, just seeing me while you're feeling whatever pleasure is present. And then also consider, if your camera is on, that you're also maybe being seen in that pleasure, and just noticing what that's like. To witness and be witnessed while in pleasure. So it can be so intimate and so vulnerable for some of us, right? And so just noticing if that comes up, if there's a feeling of maybe a little bit of fear or even a little bit of sadness, or maybe more pleasure. So I've been practicing this for a while, so I'm accustomed to it. My system's accustomed to it. So for me, there's a lot of pleasure in it. There's a lot of pleasure in sitting here and noticing how good my body feels in certain areas, and also seeing you and you seeing me. It's a really lovely feeling. But that might not be your experience. So you honor whatever your experience is. So since we are going to be talking about sex, and that is such a big topic, and I've been teaching about sex for some time now, but I still continue to come to understand what a big topic it is and how much there is in it for people. And so most of us don't have a perfect relationship with our sexuality. Most of us have some grief or some sadness, or many of us even trauma around our sexual selves. And so it's really, really important while we navigate and explore this topic that we feel as safe as possible. And so this practice we did at the top of noticing pleasure, I want to offer another option of it, which is just a place that feels okay. It doesn't necessarily have to feel great, but it feels okay. It feels neutral. Or maybe it feels good. Maybe it feels grounded. And we're going to call this a resource. And I borrow this from Peter Levine's somatic experiencing. And it's just finding a place in the body that you can put your attention when you feel overwhelmed or when you're processing something. And overwhelmed can be overwhelmed in like a really pleasant way. It could also be overwhelmed in a really uncomfortable way. So at any time throughout the next 50 minutes, if you feel overwhelmed, or maybe you're really bothered by something I say, or maybe you're excited by something I say, but you start to feel a little dysregulated, you start to feel a little kind of maybe even disembodied a bit, I want you to find some resource and drop your attention there. And you can do that anytime throughout this time together, as well as anytime you want in your life. It's a really, really beautiful tool. And it's been a huge part of my personal journey and my personal healing and evolution. And so I offer it to you, and I hope that you'll use it as needed. There's not a way you're supposed to feel during this session. You get to feel however you feel. If you have your camera on and at some point you're like, this is really uncomfortable having this conversation with the camera on, turn it off. You do what you need to do. Same thing if it's off and you're like, I think I want to turn it on. Well, then turn it on. We're just going to show up as we are, moment to moment to moment, which is what good sex is all about. It's about showing up moment to moment to moment. Okay. So I want to just briefly share a little bit about my story, so you know where I'm coming from, and then we'll talk a bit about what I call mindful masturbation, and then we'll go from there. So I, as a young kid, I was very interested in spirituality, and I was very interested in sexuality. And I started meditating when I was like 5. My mom taught me some meditation and I really loved it. And I was also very, very interested in sex. And some of the reasons I was interested in sex is that's just how I came out. I just came out that way. And some of the reasons were related to trauma and, you know, kind of a reaction to that. And so both of those things were true for me. And as I got older, as a child, life was challenging, as it is for many of us. And I grew up in mental illness, and I grew up in alcoholism, and it was on every side of the family. And there was abuse, and there was neglect, and there was also a lot of love and a lot of creativity and a lot of art and a lot of openness and a lot of spirituality and beauty. But it was complicated for a kid. And so I got really far away from my body because my body didn't feel like a safe place to be. And I also didn't continue meditating because I kind of associated that perhaps with other memories that weren't so good. And so I really kind of jumped out of my body, and I got really into sex and drugs and alcohol and spent some time there. And it was a way to, in some ways, it was a way to be in my body, because when I was intoxicated enough, I wasn't as afraid. And when I was having sex, I was as close to in my body as I could get. But they were also ways, obviously, to get out of the body and to not feel what I was feeling, to check out. And so through my teen years and through my first half of my 20s, I was pretty checked out when it came to my sexual life. I had a really fun sex life, and I had some wonderful partners, and I was always sort of the go-to person. Even before this was part of my work, I was the person people would come to and be like, so I have this situation, this sexual situation. And this started happening when I was fairly young and went up, until now when it's my job. And so I was connected, but I was also disconnected. And I had no idea how much more pleasure and adventure and possibility was available in sex. I also just had no idea how much was available in life, because mostly I was just surviving. Mostly I was just trying to be okay with the huge amount of suffering and PTSD that I was living with. So in my mid to late 20s, I got sober, which was a big part of my story. And it was something I needed to do in order to start to grow, because that was a way that I could pretty easily check out, was through drugs and alcohol. And so I gave that up, and pretty soon after started meditating. And my meditation practice from the beginning was very much an embodied practice. I learned about meditating on emotional sensations and meditating on thought. And so the way that I learned to meditate on thought was not to try to quiet the mind, but to actually observe the activity, to witness the selves that arise and pass in the mind, and to witness and feel, really deeply encounter physically the emotions in the body. And so that was the beginning of my spiritual practice starting in earnest. That's when a daily practice began. And pretty quickly, my life changed very dramatically. There were huge paradigm shifts in the way that I experienced self, other, the way I experienced reality. And that doesn't always happen for everyone right away, but that was just my path. It was the right time, right teachers, right techniques, and I was just ready. And I think I had been primed, because through my life, while I wasn't meditating every day, every so often I would drop back into that space. Even at times that it seems, I look back and I can't even believe that I would have had the capacity, but it was there, it was part of me. And so when I really started doing it, my system was just ready. And so life changed really, really quickly. And healing started happening even more quickly, mainly because I was actually in my body. I was actually experiencing what was happening in the body. And as we all know here in an embodiment conference, there's so much that gets stored in the body. And I just had years and years and years of trauma in my body. And so it started releasing, and some of that was beautiful and some of that was really painful and scary, but it was needed. And so after about a year of this exploration, no, actually it was less than a year. I spent about a year celibate. And then I got into a relationship, and after, I don't know, maybe 9 months in that relationship, I realized that these practices of mindfulness and of embodiment could really change the experience of sex. I was like, if the sunset looks more beautiful, if this plate of food tastes more amazing, if this emotion moving through my body feels more rich, I can't imagine what it would be like to have sex, to have an orgasm. That would be amazing, right? And so my partner at the time, while he was quite interested in meditation, and had been meditating before I had, he wasn't interested in that. And it's understandable, because to really get into your body during sex, to really be present with yourself and another person, it means encountering parts of you that you may have been hiding for a long time, for all kinds of reasons that many of us here in this group know, because so many of us have been through really horrific things when it comes to sex. And so I understood it. And I worked to explore mindfulness and embodiment in sexuality just for myself. So I started to explore masturbation. I started to explore, reading erotica and then noticing how that felt in my body, watching ethical porn and then noticing how does that move through my body. I worked with sex therapists. I read lots of books, and I explored and I healed, and I started to see how bringing my spiritual practice into sex was opening this whole new portal of experience. And ultimately that relationship came to an end because it wasn't in alignment anymore. It was time for me to continue moving in that direction and for him to move in the direction he was moving. And what I found is that my next relationship was completely different from anything I'd ever experienced sexually, because I had changed so much. So while I had some really fun sex, pretty much everybody that I connected with also had a fair amount of unresolved trauma, because I had unresolved trauma. And I really do believe that, at least in my experience, is that water meets its own level, that where we are tends to be what we draw in, and how we connect with others. It can look different, right? It can look like really different in someone else, but some of the core things tend to line up. And so that core piece of unresolved pain and suffering and trauma around sex, and the tendency to check out, was no longer alive in me in that way. And so I ended up connecting with someone who was really, really open and ready to explore, and really had what I would call a sexual awakening at that time for me. And things really just opened up, and I started to, have what the book Passionate Marriage by Dr. Schnarch calls electrical socket sex, where you're just like plugged into some flow, some current of electricity that just is beyond anything you've ever experienced. And at that time, it was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. So that's when I started writing about sex and spirituality and mindfulness. And I started teaching about it, and it became a huge part of my life. So interestingly, when we put our attention on something and we start to explore it spiritually or psycho-spiritually, new things are revealed. And so flash forward, whatever it is, 10 years later, it all looks really different for me. And the way that I'm implementing the tools and the practices looks really different. Because something that can happen when you're on the spiritual path, again, not for everyone, but for many, is there can be a disillusionment around a lot of things that were once felt so real and so important. We can start to see through them a bit. And I really didn't want that to happen with sex, because I used to say that sex was my hobby. I loved it so much, and I like to explore it in so many different ways. And so I didn't want awakening to fuck that up. Honestly, I just didn't want it to. So I kind of held on. And as it happens, you can only hold on for so long before your fingernails just break. And so eventually I had to start to encounter, well, what is it if sex is no longer this thing for me to have? And that's been my journey in recent years, has been, what is it like to explore sexuality from a place of emptiness? What is it like to explore sexuality from a place of not so much preference? And I share this because maybe there's a few of you that are dealing with this, or that will be dealing with this. And it's really important. It's an important topic, because sex doesn't get talked about in spiritual community as it is. Okay. And there is tantric sex, and that's a beautiful thing that I'm very inspired by, but it fits into a certain dogma, and there's a Kool-Aid you have to drink in order to really kind of buy into it. And not everybody wants to do that, right? Not everybody buys into the ideas around that. And then there's orgasmic meditation, which again has its own sort of thing. And so we can talk about sex and spirituality if it's in a really specific container. Otherwise, it doesn't get talked about. And we all know what the result of that is. The result of that is all of these spiritual communities that are falling apart because of sexual misconduct. Because it's not being discussed. It's not being talked about. It's not having light shown on it. It's absolutely fine to be celibate, but it still requires open communication, at least with yourself. And so because it doesn't get talked about in spiritual community on the basic level of just like, hey, what if you took all that mindfulness you've been practicing and put it on your cock while you're having sex with your partner? What would that be like? Or what if you put it in your whole body? Or what if while you were having sex, you allow the pelvic floor muscles to relax and you let go of the idea of how you thought it should be, and you just started noticing a buzzing in your solar plexus and you focused on that. Okay, this is just an example, but these are basic ideas of bringing mindfulness into sex that don't get talked about. So if that's not getting talked about, then most likely disillusionment around sex and sexual self is not really getting talked about either. And it is a side effect. So whether you're focusing on sex or not, if you're on a spiritual path, eventually at some point you'll deal with some level of disillusionment. If you are really observing and witnessing the arising and passing of self, eventually you're going to see through that self, including that sexual self. So we need to talk about it because there's a lot of suffering that gets caused as a result of not talking about it. So that's why I'm very open about my personal journey. The other piece of my personal journey is chronic illness and chronic pain. So I'm not going to get too much into that today, but I will say that embodied sex, mindful sex, while dealing with a lot of physical pain is its own journey. And that wants to be talked about too. And both of these things, whether it's a disillusionment around sex and sexual self, or whether it's dealing with something like chronic pain, the answer is going to be more embodiment, more mindfulness. How can I get more present with what's occurring? How can I have a new discovery of sexual pleasure and sexual desire when I'm no longer experiencing pleasure and desire in that way? How can I find pleasure and connection with myself and with a partner sexually, even when most of my body hurts? Because it's important to continue to develop and enliven and enlighten that sexual part of self. So it all comes back to, can I get present with this body? Can I let go of my ideas and stories of how it should be? And can I just be here now? So whatever part of that spectrum you're on, from, oh, I'm interested in maybe bringing some mindfulness into sex, all the way to, there's no self anymore, and so what's the point of sex? Wherever you are in that spectrum, I believe that one of the tools for this is an embodied mindfulness practice. So where we started today was with a focus on pleasure in the body. And I want to talk about the first exercise that I give in with clients and with workshops is the mindful masturbation exercise. And I'm just going to share how it works. And then I want to open it up for questions about anything that I've talked about, as well as the practice we did, as well as this mindful masturbation technique that I want to share. So the way this practice works is, ideally you already have some kind of mindful embodiment practice. So you know how to pay attention to sensations in your body. So if that's something that you don't already have, I suggest starting to cultivate that. And there are many ways to cultivate that. There are books, there are YouTube videos, there are conferences, there's all kinds of ways to start to cultivate a daily practice of embodied mindfulness. Then what you'll do to bring that embodied mindfulness into a self-pleasure exercise, and this is just one version of it, and there's lots of ways, and this is an invitation, right? So anything I say is an invitation. I'm not here to say this is the way, this is what you should do. This is an invitation for you to then go explore in your own unique, authentic way. So you'll create a space for yourself that's comfortable. It could be your bed, it could be cushions and pillows and blankets on the floor, it could be a couch, it could be a hammock. I don't know, that sounds a little dangerous, but it could be a hammock. You're going to make sure you have the space to yourself, so you're not going to be interrupted by kids or partners or parents or whoever might be around, neighbors needing to borrow milk or something. Lock your door, put your phone on airplane mode, and you're going to set a timer for 10 to 15 minutes. So in preparation for this, if lubricant is part of what works for you with self-pleasure, then have it ready. Other than that, we're going to leave everything else to the side. So we're not going to bring in toys. We're not going to bring in fantasy. We're not going to bring in porn. Not because there's anything wrong with any of those things. I'm not the sex teacher that says no vibrators, no porn, blah, blah, blah. That's because everybody's unique and you need to discover what's right for you. For this exercise though, you're going to put those things aside. Before we move forward here, I want everyone to check in with their bodies and just notice how you're feeling. I'm using some words that maybe you're not used to a meditation teacher using on an embodiment conference. So just noticing, how does it feel? Is there any part of the body that's activated, maybe in a pleasant or unpleasant way? Are you jumping out of your body a little bit? Just noticing. Finding some resource, finding a place that feels good in the body. And then choosing what's right for you. Is it right for you to come back and focus on the rest of what I'm saying? Or is it right for you to just hang out with resource for a few minutes? Either one is okay. There's not a right or wrong here. Okay. So you're going to leave those things aside. Again, not because they're wrong or bad, but because they're just not part of the exercise. It's just going to be you and your body. You're welcome. If it feels nice to you to light candles or incense or something like this, you can. It's not required. Mindful sex does not need to involve rose petals and candles and a long-term monogamous partner. Mindful sex can happen in a bathroom with someone you just met. So certainly, while you're doing this mindful masturbation exercise, if candles and incense is part of it, great. If not, fine. Like, you do what works for you. You'll set that timer for 10 to 15 minutes, and you'll start to explore pleasure in your body. But you won't do this by going directly to the genitals. Instead, you start to explore. What does it feel like to caress your face, to squeeze your chin, to stroke your hair, to give yourself a little joke, to give yourself a little stroke, to give yourself a hug, to tickle the chest. Start to explore your body in sensual, potentially sexual ways without going to the genitals. So just creating and experiencing pleasure in your body. And just like we did at the top, you just keep bringing your attention back to the pleasure. The mind will have things to say. That's fine. Just return to what you're feeling. If something doesn't feel good, don't do that. Do something that does feel good instead. So I remember giving this exercise to a client, and he came back to report how it went. And he said, well, I just stroked above my left nipple for the whole time, and it felt amazing. I did it wrong, didn't I? I'm like, no, that's exactly it. If that was what was pleasurable for you, that's the mindful masturbation exercise. It doesn't ever have to involve the genitals, certainly in the beginning as you're starting to explore. So you find out what feels good for you. There's no right way. And the mind is going to, for a lot of people, the mind comes in and says, you know, you're doing it wrong. This is weird, blah, 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 blah. That's fine. You don't need to shut those thoughts off. Just come back to the body. Now, if eventually you want to move to the genitals, great. But you're not going to go into what you normally do. Most of us have like the way we masturbate, the way we get off. This exercise is not about getting off. You might have an orgasm, you might have 5 orgasms, you might have no orgasm. It doesn't matter. The point of this practice is embodied mindful pleasure and being present with yourself while experiencing pleasure and finding out, oh, wow, this thing I never knew felt good feels good. How interesting. Or, oh, this thing I thought felt good actually doesn't feel that good when I'm present with it. Okay. So you're going to explore masturbation in a brand new way. So just like when you sit down to do a meditation practice and a teacher might say, treat every breath as a brand new breath, as a whole new experience. I want you to treat this masturbation as a brand new experience, fresh and new, something you've never experienced before. And continue. And maybe you stay with the genitals. Maybe you go back to some other part of the body. Maybe, and this does happen for some people, as you get really present with your body in this way, in the context of sexuality and pleasure, some grief might come up, some sadness might come up, some anger might come up. And your mindful masturbation practice may end up being a, oh, sweetheart, oh, I'm right here with you. I'm right here with you. I love you. You're safe. I got you. That might turn out to be what your practice is. It also might turn out to be like a wild sexual experience unlike anything you've ever had, right? Or anything in between. So again, there's not a right way. So when the timer goes off, what I like to suggest is that you have a journal or something to write with or type on, it could even be your phone, a note in your phone, some notes about how it went, what came up for you. And then if you're kind of worked up and you didn't have an orgasm and you want one, go for it. That's fine. Or just hang out with that desire. Notice what that's like through the day. Bring it into masturbation later. Bring it into sex with a partner later. Bring that energy with you. Either one is fine. What I usually suggest is that you try this about 3 times over a week or 2. And each time do a little bit of writing. And this could just be a few lines, or it could be a few pages, whatever comes up. And then to kind of look back and kind of see the arc of your experience and explore what that was for you. One of the things that I hear, and I hear this more from folks, I hear this more from men, is that they're worried that doing this practice means they don't get to just have fun and jerk off anymore. I hear this from people of all genders, but I mostly hear this from cisgendered men. Oh, great. Another thing I have to do my practice with. Oh, great. This thing that was fun and was like this thing I got to just let go and release into is now a practice. So I hear that usually from men. Everyone I hear, I think I'm doing it wrong. Most people anyway. And I also hear that it's embarrassing or, uncomfortable in some way. So the first thing I want to address is this is just an exercise. I'm not saying that you're going to do this every time you self-pleasure. I mean, you can. I don't, though. I don't do this every time. Not even close. But it is something that you can use as a practice, which then informs your self-pleasure. Okay? And so don't think this is about taking something away. This is about adding something. This is a complement. This is a deeper exploration. If it feels like you're doing it wrong, as I've said again and again today, you're not. And it's important to get in touch with that part of yourself that thinks you're doing it wrong. Because that part of self is coming up in lots of areas of your life. And it's also coming up in sex with a partner too. and it's blocking intimacy with yourself and them. So if you're noticing this come up during the mindful masturbation exercise, get curious about it. Get curious about that part of self and get really kind with that part of yourself, because there's not this part of yourself saying you're doing it wrong because that part of you feels great. That part of you was probably told you're doing it wrong. And that part of you might have even gotten like hit upside the head being told you're doing it wrong. And so there's a strong attachment to that part of self and towards that's going to keep you safe. If you can figure out you're doing it wrong, then you'll be safe. Then you're not going to get in trouble, right? Whatever it is for you. And so we want to be really kind to that part of self as we're working with it. But we also want to heal that part of self so that we can move forward. And if you feel like it's embarrassing or silly, great. Be embarrassed, feel silly, and do it anyway. And actually, you're by yourself. The feeling of embarrassment, heat in the cheeks and like a tickly feeling in the stomach actually can feel quite pleasurable. There's nobody there to see it, right? So these are just a few of the things that come up with this exercise. So of course, you can take this idea and bring it into sex with your partner as well. And one of the things I think you're all receiving is a PDF about a basic pleasure practice for partners. Now, Kim can let me know if that is that, yeah, okay, good. So you'll be able, this is something you can use with your partner. And it's a more in depth, a lot more in depth, but the basic part of it is the same, which is that you're getting present with pleasure in your body. You're just doing it with someone else. And so this is a really good starting point, and it will give you a lot of information. Just being with yourself for 15 minutes with nothing other than you and your body and the experience of pleasure will give you a lot of information. So there's always so much more to say than there is time to say it, because like I said, this is a huge topic, but I hope this has given you a place to begin to explore. And I'd like to open it up for questions now for the last bit of time here. And so I guess either you can turn your unmute or you can just type something in. So I'll start with the question here, and then however you want to ask your question is fine. So what if I did not have a partner for a long time, for many years? Interestingly, this is something that people contact me about quite a bit on social media, that they very much want to experience this with a partner but haven't had a partner for many years. And I think first of all, it's really powerful to deeply explore and encounter and develop your sexual self on your own as well. And when you are really in touch with that part of you, and that part of you is really alive and awake, it tends to reflect outwards as well. People do tend to notice it, and people do tend to be attracted to it, and they tend to be people who are also awake and alive in that part of themselves. And so I do think that this is a great place to start, is to just get really in touch with your own sexual self and developing and evolving and healing that part of you. That doesn't guarantee that you're gonna find a partner, right? And there's nothing I or anyone else is gonna say to you that is a promise or is a surefire like solution for that, okay? So, there are people who charge a lot of money to tell you like, I will show you how to get the girl or show you how to get the person, whatever. And I don't think that's true. I think it's kind of BS. What they can do is they can help to increase a sense of confidence and well-being, which is going to probably attract more people than the opposite. And so the same idea of like, get in touch with your sexual self and your own exploration. And most likely that's going to start to draw people in. But also in the interim, while you're feeling that loneliness, which is really an epidemic for us human beings, loneliness, get really curious about it. Bring your practice into that loneliness as well. It's all a vehicle for awakening. It's all an opportunity for deeper experience of embodiment. So if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling longing, what does that loneliness and longing feel like in your body? How curious can you get about it? Where's the healing that wants to happen around it? So all of it can be used as opportunity for growing. Okay, so I see someone raising their hand. I don't actually know how to, and then I see something in Russian that I can't read, which is a question. So maybe either Kim or Julie can help me with these two.
No, it's we just give some information for people that they can,
Okay.
open.
And then whoever raised their hand can unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, Tim, you're on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your session. It's really important for me. And I have a question about fear, like fear in sex and fear in exploring myself and exploring another person or another person's in the sex. And I have a lot of fear in this, and maybe you can help to work with it somehow.
Yeah, how does that fear manifest?
What? Sorry?
How does the fear arise? How do you experience the fear?
Typically, I felt like I'm like a wrong person with wrong, body or approach of acting.
Okay, I see. So like an insecurity, the mind starts telling you
Yeah.
you're doing it wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
was there?
in case of mindsets that now, like in Russia, in our community, it's super hard to talk truly about our feeling and our states, and that's why like every feedback that I get, it's like, is it true or not? What's going on? Because it's really rare here to I mean, in my community, in my own community, it's really rare to feel the deep connection between two persons. Yeah, to talk truly what's going on.
Yeah. Thank you. So starting with the insecurity, the fear, one of the most powerful things you can do is, well, two things. It's two sides of the same coin. One side of the coin is to really just pile the love onto that part of you that's insecure and afraid, right? Because that part of you has been around for a long time. It didn't just pop up, right? Like that's a part of you that has an origin. And so you want to give that part of self a lot of love and kindness. Talk to that part of yourself. Give that part of yourself compassion. So before you're going to have a sexual experience with someone, have a few minutes with yourself to just be like, you're an amazing person, and you're deserving of pleasure, and you are capable of connecting on deep levels, and you deserve that, and I love you, and you're safe. Just talk to that part of yourself. Give that part of yourself compassion. You can even do it during sex, maybe silently in your mind, unless you are with someone who's like really open, in which case you can do it out loud. So really giving the self compassion and love. The flip side of that coin is to completely see through that self, is to notice that self is just made up of phenomena. Thought is just impermanent activity that's coming and going. Emotion is just impermanent sensation, activity that's coming and going. And if you sit and you observe that activity, and you do that every day for 10 or 15 minutes, and if you contact me, they'll put my website up, and if you contact me, I can send you some videos and stuff to help with that. But if you sit and you observe the self coming and going, the self stops being so solid. And in that moment, when you're engaging in sex and that self starts to arise, you've given it some love, you can also just notice that there's not really much solidity to it. It's just a fuzzy coming and going. So those are two kind of quick ways of talking about it. There's obviously more to say. But the other piece you said about the communication, this is where we can start to think about activism. So sometimes I call myself a sexual activist. And I call myself a sexual activist because I talk about sex and people don't talk about it. Now, there are people more and more that do, you know, there's a lot of wonderful sex educators, but it's still the minority. And for many, for many people talking about sex, it's within a specific context, like I said earlier, like tantric sex with masculine and feminine and energy and blah, blah, blah. And then in some, it's like the kink community. It's just that, right? So what I try to do is just like, let's just talk about sex in all of its variations, all of its beauty. And because I do that, I run up against a lot, right? Like people are freaked out by that and angry and excited and all the things. And so I get everything from religious people saying like that I'm going to go to hell to people of all genders sending me pictures of their genitalia. You know, it's like, it's part of what happens when you talk frankly about sex. But the other thing that happens is that people hear it and they start to think, well, wait, maybe I can talk about it too. In my own way. Maybe I can get honest about this too. And then it starts to spread. And that's really ultimately why I'm doing it, because it's like the more that we shine the light on all parts of self, the more we wake up. And the more we wake up, the better chance at saving humanity we have. And so for you, it's Tim, right? Tim, for you, every time you're willing to be open anyway, every time you're willing to talk about your pleasure, every time you're willing to be open about what you want and what you don't want, every time you ask your partner a question, even though you know they might just look at you with a blank stare, you are practicing activism. And so that's so valuable and so important. So within your community, you can make a change by being willing to just be uncomfortable. Yes, I know, but to do it anyway, in a way that's safe for you, right? Like I'm also a nude model. I'm not saying everybody needs to have nude pictures of themselves on the internet to be a sexual activist. That's just part of what I do. So you get to practice it in the way that's right for you. But I do want you to think about it in those terms, that not only can you change the person with you, but you can help change the community, which can help change the larger community, which can ultimately help change the world. Okay? Okay. So I think we just have a few minutes left, but let me look at these two questions that are here. Is there such a thing when you start preferring masturbation to sex with a partner, like escape in a fantasy world? Yes, there is, but that's really good information. That's telling you there's something, if you have a partner that you'd rather not have sex with, that's giving you some information about their relationship that, that is really important, right? And that requires communication. Maybe it requires a therapist or a coach. Maybe it requires a breakup, right? I don't know. It depends on your situation. Now, if you don't have a regular partner, but you'd rather masturbate than have sexual experiences with other people, first of all, that's fine, as long as you're not suffering as a result. For some people who are on the asexuality spectrum, masturbation is what they prefer. They don't want to actually have sex with other people, and that's totally legitimate. So it might be that for a while, that's what works for you. And then if it doesn't work for you anymore, then it's time to start exploring. As far as the word escape, we want to be aware when we're escaping, that generally means we're checking out in some way. There's nothing wrong with fantasy, but if it becomes a way of checking out and not actually feeling what we're feeling, then that's when it starts to become something we want to address. So I'm aware of the time and that I'm supposed to wrap up at 5 of, and so I'm happy to answer Daria and Anna's questions in the coffee chat room after we wrap up, because I just want to honor the time boundary here. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure, such a great way to start my Monday morning. Thanks for letting me join you on your Monday evening. And thank you to Kim and to the conference, to Julie and to the conference for having me.
Thanks, Jessica. This was really powerful, I guess, and also playful. And few words about, well, I guess we say it in Russian, right? Why do we do it in English? Yeah? Okay. So, как обычно, друзья, запись этой сессии и всех остальных можно купить на нашем сайте. И ссылки сейчас будут в чате. Также расписание там есть. И завтрашняя утренняя сессия, с которой мы начнем завтрашний день, очень логически продолжают эту. Это будет сессия Максима Кузьмина «Mindfulness, чувствительность и удовольствие». То есть буквально можно предположить, что они сговорились, но нет, это не так. Я точно это знаю. Вот, и возвращаясь к записям, мы напоминаем вам, что, покупая записи, вы не только приобретаете вот это, все эти сокровища для себя, вы также поддерживаете нас и фонд «Такие дела», который поддерживает другие благотворительные проекты. И прямо сейчас мы вернемся к Джессике и узнаем ее какой-то секретный топ-тип для нас. Jessica, and in the end, we also ask you for your best top tip advice about sex and pleasure and mindfulness, if you have any.
Today it is, it's different every time I do something like this.
Sure.
Today, I think today it's just going to be, you're not doing it wrong. Yeah.
Great. Well, but actually we were like so super fast. There's this thing, I don't know, maybe we can go with one of those questions. We
Sure,
have like another 4 minutes.
Great, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm so proud of myself. I always end up going over, so I was really trying to like be good. Okay.
Cool.
On a surface level, it seems that most of the experience of mindful masturbation will be stored or transmitted through skin only. Does it mean this is a starting point only? Are we supposed to sense something in muscles or the entire body?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, when we bring this kind of mindfulness and presence to sexual pleasure, it does become not only an entire body experience, all the muscles, everything. It can become a transcendent experience. The body can start to feel really big or even really small, and we can start to have these oneness experiences. So if there's a partner involved, we can start to really like truly merge. And so, yeah, as a starting point, it might be that you just notice some throbbing in the genital area or some warmth in the chest. But over time, as you become accustomed to being really present with pleasure in the body, it grows and it expands and it can become all kinds of things. And something I like to suggest that people do is tune into pleasure all throughout the day. You can do like a 30 days of pleasure practice where every day you're noticing things that are pleasurable, and there are endless things that are pleasurable. Like right now, I had my legs crossed one way and I've just crossed them the other way. And there's pleasure in shifting the cross of my legs, right? It's just like there was a little achy part, and when I shifted my legs, it's not there anymore. And there's the absence of that achy part and some relaxation. That's pleasure. I'm noticing I had some black tea this morning, and I'm noticing the feeling of being caffeinated, and that's pleasurable. I'm looking out my window and there's sunlight on the trees out my window, and that's a pleasurable experience. When we end this call, I'm going to go and I'm going to pee, and that's going to be a pleasurable experience because my bladder's starting to get full from the tea I drank, right? So it's endless, the things that the ways we can experience pleasure throughout the day. And the more you tune into them, the more pleasure you feel. Like just hearing me name those things, you may be more aware of pleasure in your body right now. And so if all throughout the day, and you can set a reminder on your phone or put up some sticky notes, something like this, you're noticing and just pausing, even just for a few seconds with an experience of pleasure, you're heightening your ability to contact pleasure. And so when you do go to do something that's obviously pleasurable, like masturbation or sex or a massage or a hot tub or, a delicious meal, the pleasure is just going to explode. It's going to be on a much deeper and higher volume because you've been attuning to pleasure all day.
Yeah, so like tuning to all the pleasures and remembering that you can't do that wrong.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, this is the one thing I'll say about the can't do it wrong. With sex, this is my only rule, is that it's consensual. That it's consensual for the other person, but also for yourself. Because, sometimes we push ourselves to do things that we don't actually fully want to do. And so I always say, you know, that's really just the only, it's that it's consensual. And I also say safe, but people have different interpretations of what that means. So, you know, my personal rule is consensual and protected, you know, but really that's it. Other than that, as long as everybody involved, whether that's 10 people or just yourself, is consenting fully, enthusiastically, then there's no wrong.
Okay, I think that's the point we were heading to. So thank you very much. We finished the recording here.